Hi, good to see you, chums. I really wanted today to just take a little bit of time out to reanalyse some of the stories, as we've often done on these longer form videos, about what we know and what I've found out for you, so you understand exactly what's gone on behind the scenes, you know? And what I mean, you could say this about everything, couldn't you? But what I've literally found out regarding, of course, the relationship between the Princess of Wales, Catherine, and of course the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, has been absolutely fascinating, because there's obviously their version of events, the media's version of events, and what really happened. And I think that's actually more important, obviously, because, as I've said to you before, you have a lot of these royal reporters, and I'm not having a go at anybody, I'm just telling you how I see it. And they'll say things like, oh yes, you know, they have Zoom chats and Prince Charles is talking to Princess Lily, and you think, absolute rubbish, you know, who believes this sort of stuff? But a lot of the mainstream media do, because they want to have this positivity factor filled in, and it fills airtime. The realities are normally so vastly different. By the way, if you're looking at this, yes, this is my new flask. Do you like it? Absolutely, yes. It's from a very posh store, you might know it. And I have to tell you, it does keep the tea hot longer. I know, I like to share these things with you. It's important, isn't it? But you know what I mean? You find something. You see, the other flask, it broke. I won't put it into a bit of a crisis. Fell out the bag, you know. So I had to actually prise open the wallet. I know. Well, I'm still suffering now. It's not easy, is it? Somebody else, of course, who suffered was none other than Catherine, the Princess of Wales, simply because of the mistruths that were aired across the world, all thanks to the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. None more so, really, than when she sat down with the chat show doyen Oprah Winfrey. And that particular interview will be analysed for years to come, because, you know, people forget that Harry was brought in at a certain point. Always Meghan with the big bombshells. And then, as we all know, he couldn't stick to the script because he's not sort of a bit part actress like Meghan Markle, so couldn't really understand where he was meant to come in. She'd said several, he said one. You remember all those sort of things? I know I've mentioned this many times, but the thing that made me laugh was the absolute outright lie about the secret wedding. And, you know, she's sort of sitting there with these chickens going around saying, well, actually, we got married before. You think, nobody think that you might check this, love? You know, you're not that bright. And this is the problem with Meghan. You see, the very first thing I wanted to look at was the fact that Meghan's version of events was when she first met Catherine. She said, oh, I'm a hugger and I like to reach out to people and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And their first meeting was unexpected. And apparently Meghan was barefoot in ripped jeans and just some kind of shirt or something. Well, first and foremost, very nice. Yes, very relaxed. But that actually is not true. You see, the reason why that's not true is simply this. Wherever the Prince and Princess of Wales go on the estate, and this was on the estate, the bottom line would be that, you know, security would still have to be told this is where they're going at this time. Even though it's in the enclave and all of that sort of stuff, security would know. Harry and Meghan would know at that point that Catherine and William were going to pop by at some point within that particular time. So if Meghan Markle was that concerned about how she looked and the fact that she was scruffy and caught off guard, and apparently this was a better thing for her because it was a true self, I don't think Meghan would know her true self if she looked in a mirror, but there you go. So the story goes that she reached out unexpectedly, finding, of course, William and Catherine at her door and, well, reached in to hug. But apparently they weren't huggers. That was all disproven, as we've seen for so many times before. But this is Meghan's version of events. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting this is that Catherine, as we know, has gone through a very tough year, and people are sort of saying, oh, she's the instrumentalist behind trying to get William and Harry to speak. But actually, as I'll tell you a little bit later on, that's not the case. You know, she's had enough, and rightly so. I think what Catherine said about her sort of recent difficulties, shall we say, she doesn't like the word health scares and all that sort of stuff. I think she's just reevaluated her life and thought, well, this is what's important. And what wasn't important was, of course, an ongoing battle with a former cable TV actress. You could understand that. Another bigger story that I really need to touch on is this, because Prince Harry mentioned this in his book, Spare. And what was fascinating about this was it was all about, the very big event where it was the Fab Four. Do you remember that? And they're all going to do wonders together. You could sense a tension there when we were in that room, whatever. Meghan grabbed the microphone and like some loony at a karaoke, you could not prise it off her. She was giving a speech regardless, playing with those new locks that she had, all that sort of stuff. Catherine, of course, in the throes of pregnancy, probably thought, I really could just do with putting my feet up, but she was there to support. And that really was, I think the biggest sort of takeaway from that. Also, if you remember when the interviewer famously said, do you all agree on everything? And William said, no. I think that really said it all for everybody, didn't it? Meghan looked a little bit shocked by that because apparently, we should all just agree with what Meghan's rhetoric is. It's like when she turned up at the National Theatre and stayed for about 15 minutes, heavily pregnant, yes, and then, of course, disappeared, never to be seen again, even though the Queen kindly bestowed that sort of patronage on her because of her theatrical background. The fact that she'd only been in a few school plays meant nothing, of course, never done Broadway, never done serious theatre, but that's not a problem. But back to this particular thing. The story goes, of course, that Meghan, just behind the scenes, asked Catherine if she had a little bit of lip gloss she could borrow. Catherine, like all women, very organised, rummaged in and, gave her some. And apparently, according to the book and Harry, she grimaced when, Meghan gave her this back. Now, she put it on her finger, right? But she squeezed it on with the top. Now, this is what I know. And then she put it to her lips. Why would you want it back? I mean, why would you? So you can understand when Catherine said, no, you keep it. This was stunned back as she was aggressive and it wasn't very nice and wasn't very pleasant. That really wasn't the case. You could understand Catherine would not miss a lip gloss tube or two. And if Meghan was super organised and knows that she's making personal appearances and literally is finite about every single aspect from the lighting to making sure she tracks exactly where the clicks go on the camera so that she knows at that point her eyes are wide open, why would she not come along with her own lip gloss? Really, I'll leave you to work that bit out. It's very, very clear as to what was going on even at that point. Another picture that's fascinating to see is the day when the ladies were in the park with their children. This should have been a rather, pleasant afternoon. Polo was being played at the time, and there was Catherine and Meghan. You could sense the fact that these two ladies were now worlds apart. Now, a lot of people say to me, why didn't they get on? Well, basically from two different backgrounds. Catherine comes from a very sort of English background, very polite, very open to ideas, whereas Meghan, very pushy, wanted her own way literally from the start. Simply from the fact that she felt she'd come into this family, she was going to radicalise it, make it modernised and basically make the monarchy pay because she'd read some stuff up. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating for me because basically, when they did meet for the very first time, Meghan went on at length about Catherine's wedding, and this is pre-wedding, you understand. Now, Meghan had vast detail, and this has been reported back to me directly from what Catherine had said about the wedding, all the exciting things that went on, the whole sort of pomp and circumstance, everything about that fabulous day at Westminster Abbey, of which I covered live actually for American television. And it was spectacular. You have to remember, we hadn't seen anything like that in years. There were racks up in Westminster where all the cameras were. Everybody was very excited. So many film crews around the world. Really incredible. Now, if Meghan knew nothing about the British monarchy, who did she think the people stood in the Abbey were, right? So she goes on to do her own orchestrated reality with the BBC's Michelle Hussein and says, well, actually, no, I didn't know anything about it. And apparently Harry then was absolutely stunned and amazed to find that she was Googling Prince Andrew to find stuff out about him. How dumb is this guy? I mean, really, when you look at it like that at that point, so she's just Googling him and he walks in, oh, I'm just checking on your family, I don't know too much. She knew everything about Catherine's wedding, to the point, right, what's interesting, that she talked about this at length with people behind the scenes on Suits. So she knew who the main players were. She would have known a lot about Prince Harry, which goes right back to the very straight initial lie of when she first met Harry. The only thing she wanted to know was, is he nice? Not, is he nice, rich, available, will he marry me, could I have a charmed life? No, just is he nice, because that's important, of course. Now, Harry was nice. Meghan wasn't nice because, let's not forget, she dumped her first husband, and anybody else along the way that was no use to her. She climbed the greasy ladder of success, not in Hollywood, but just in television, mainly in Toronto, in Canada. So you understand how this story, everything along the way, nothing makes sense. Now, Catherine, as I said, is a very open person, and I've watched her up close at events. What you see is what you get. She responds to kindness. She responds to people being, smiley, happy to see her. She wouldn't have had a side about what Meghan was like. She'd never really met people like that before, pushy actress types that desperately want to get the main limelight. If you remember when they went to Wimbledon together, there was Catherine, elegant as usual, but, just playing it down because she was there to enjoy the tennis. Meghan looked like she'd come from some sort of striped rock factory with some oversized trousers, and you think, well, what's this look about, But clearly, she knew she was going to get some attention. The infamous messy bun was on display, and I was told, Catherine tried her very best. According to that source, though, apparently when Catherine was explaining the rudiments of Wimbledon and tennis, she said, don't worry, my best friend Serena Williams, I know all about tennis, and that cooked that dead. I mean, where'd you go from that, So you can understand what avenues were very difficult for Catherine to go down. She figured that maybe if she brought in a sister, Pippa Middleton, a nice girl, very similar to Catherine, a little bit feistier though, I would say. I was lucky enough to meet Pippa when she was signed to NBC for an ill-fated time herself about maybe making a programme with the now disgraced Matt Lauer. Fascinating story there. Tell you more about that later. Well, what happened there was, they tried to include Meghan and maybe invited to, their family home, Bucklebury. Meghan was always busy, Now, she didn't want to go, in my opinion, around by women who she felt might be able to crack through whatever story she was perpetuating while there. Now, the bigger story goes, of course, that really they all fell apart once Meghan decided she didn't like the hullabaloo of living in one of the most prestigious addresses in the very heart of London, Kensington Palace. No, it wasn't good enough. She wanted to be in Windsor Castle, and she figured that if she was in Windsor Castle, even though in the grounds of Knott Cottage, pre-Frogmore, all that sort of stuff, well, then she could maybe work her way up to the main castle. And no doubt a bit like Rapunzel chucking out her locks out the top of the tower, maybe Prince Harry could climb up, secure those private rooms that were now not used by members of the royal family, and she could secure herself in her own castle, a princess in the castle. The Queen was having none of it, as you can imagine. Royal protocol would state that William and Catherine would get that first. Hence the reason there was an even more deep-seated now resentment towards William and Catherine. But as ever, the way Meghan played it very cleverly, some might say, well, once again, it created sort of ructions between William and Harry. Now, again, where this gets even more sort of convoluted, as it were, the bigger issue that actually Catherine had was the fact that when she tried to get things moving in a more positive light, at the terrible situation of the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. You'll remember she was spotted sort of moving back so that, she could allow the two brothers, and it didn't really work. But in essence, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was all about. She was trying to remove herself from it and say, look, forget me, you two really do need to get on. Whether me and Meghan get on is irrelevant, really. We can move on from that. No, wasn't having it. Apparently, once, of course, when you look at this, the bigger picture, Meghan saw this actually happening, blew a wig back in Montecito, couldn't believe it. What's going on here, because she now was losing a bit of control. And this is where it gets even more difficult, because the harder that Catherine tried to cement things with Harry and William, she wasn't having it. Now, what you will notice is whenever Meghan was around William, she was always looking at him as some starry-eyed international pop star. Goo-goo eyes, looking at him as if he was the absolute golden gift of everything. We've all seen it, right? The look where you think, I'll just manipulate this situation. Now, quite what was going through Meghan Markle's mind, we will truly never know, but we can always assume that Prince William truly understood what the manipulation was, perhaps if Meghan could suddenly win over William the way that she'd spun, of course, her husband Prince Harry like some old 60s spinning top, well, then she really would take control and Catherine would be on a bit of a lost leader. Now, what about this? Catherine has openly spoken about this particular situation where she said she found it one of the hardest things she'd ever had to do. And that was, of course, now what we dub as the Windsor walkabout. Can you imagine having to arrive in a car with the nemesis literally next to you, with the person who said so many bad things about you? But in the name, of course, of royal protocol, William very kindly offered that opportunity to Harry to reunite together. But apparently, behind the scenes, that didn't go well either, because Meghan, she didn't have time to get ready. Nobody forewarned her. She had to do her own makeup. And of course, there she came out of the car. But what you see for the very first time is Meghan truly acting this role, because she does look terrified of Catherine, and rightly so. When you've said all of those things about her daughter, about a bullying situation, suddenly you are now confronted, and she grips Harry's arm in a vice-like grip that she will not remove from, because, and then as you saw her rubbing Harry's back and all this, but this is a woman, remember, that could barely be bothered to acknowledge the brilliant Queen, our Queen for 70 years, didn't want to spend her last summer with her because she was too busy. Too busy doing what? Clearly not making pots of jam, because that came a little bit later. So why couldn't she afford the kindness, as she often speaks about? Even now on the Thanksgiving, she recently said, if you've got room at your table and people are lonely, invite them in. Well, Meghan, you didn't bother inviting your father, your half-sister, your half-brother. You haven't bothered inviting any of Harry's family. So you're a fake. You don't want people to come in. But it looks good in print for those that are gullible enough to believe it. But back to this Windsor walkabout. Well, afterwards, apparently, Meghan burst into tears during the strain behind the scenes. And this was all brought on by the fact that she didn't feel any warmth from the family. No kidding, really? And so, again, manipulation of its highest order. Now, if you remember when the coronation hit, and people may have forgotten this, but apparently, the king did this absolute terrible faux pas, because it hit the date, of course, May the 6th, on the day that it would be Prince Archie's birthday. Now, very remiss of His Majesty the King not to call Meghan first and say, you got any plans? I can understand if you're busy, I'll just postpone the coronation, let you work round you, really, sister. What do you need to do? Oh, well, Meghan utilised that opportunity. It was the birthday of her eldest child, Archie, who we never see, is a bit like tracing paper. Where'd you find this kid? Now, what's interesting here is she did the ultimate disservice and, in my opinion, the complete disrespect to His Majesty the King, simply because of this. When you think about it, he was gracious enough to walk her halfway down the aisle when her own father was incapacitated, right? He couldn't make it, and that was that, through no fault of his own. But I'm sure she was delighted, because suddenly she's now got the Prince of Wales. But she dumped him halfway because she just wanted to be the star, walking towards, that service that went on forever. Even the brilliant Queen was starting to wilt at this point. I mean, how much more did you have to take of the sermon? Marvellous as it was, you understand. So when it came to the coronation, you would have thought, well, bit of respect. Meghan may just rock up for that. No. And also, no children. Now, according to a well-placed source, Catherine was absolutely appalled at this complete show of disrespect. If there was anything that she disliked Meghan for, this was it. she has the ultimate respect for His Majesty the King. You can see they have a great bond, clearly, he thinks the world of her and she thinks the world of him. And apparently Charles gets on incredibly well with the Middleton family. They've got this rather unique bond that we've never seen before, commoner against royal, as it were. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. So you can understand that's everything that Meghan would truly dislike. But moving forward, where is it now? Well, as we know, Prince Harry apparently says that unless people come out publicly and apologise to the way that his wife's been treated, well, she won't be coming back. Some might suggest that's a bonus, of course. The other side of the coin is apparently it's not safe for her to be here, even though when she was last here, she wound down the window and was waving to imaginary fans. You get the picture. This is Meghan, of course, who's been able to, shall we say, whip-like Harry into believing her version of events. But even now, as we're recording this, things are starting to unravel because even the dimmest start to wake up from a fog haze that you're in. And you look around and think, well, what have I actually got? What was the plan and what have I come away with? And the bottom line was, Harry got on incredibly well with Catherine and her family. They were very close. He confided in her in a lot. Hence the reason that she got behind the mental health campaign Heads Together. She did a lot to support Harry and probably would have carried on doing that. But of course, once his wife had decided to publicly trash her and allow those biographies to trash her as well, how on earth could she even begin to forgive him? Now, sources tell me that Catherine is a forgiving person, but right now her focus is on herself, her family, and moving forward with her life. One day she will become our queen, and I believe that Harry and Meghan will simply become a footnote in history. Meghan Markle will always, in my opinion, be the second build in anything that comes along. It's just the way life is. Now, some people might be thrilled by the fact that even just to be near the life that you dream about would be enough. But it's clearly never enough for Meghan. And while Meghan has tried to pull Catherine, the Princess of Wales, down with many different aspects of negativity, releasing her American Riviera video on, of course, the period of time when Catherine announced that she had a terrible illness, well, truly, does she show any remorse, any sort of compassion, or, as she said recently, reach out to people who might need you? Who's Meghan ever reached out to other than herself? And can you really blame Catherine, the Princess of Wales, for saying enough is enough? I'm moving on with my life without the Sussexes involved. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.